Hey guys, it's Dr. Brad. Hope you're well. And thank you for joining me today as we talk about why you're continuing to struggle with that afternoon slump in your energy. Now, there's a few different reasons why this might be happening, and we're going to go over some of the more common causes. That way you can consider them, figure out what makes the most sense for you, and then of course you can make some changes to try to improve your energy and have better endurance throughout the day. So if that sounds like a plan to you, stick around for some fun and learning. And if you could, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for notifications. I post new videos every Thursday on the best natural strategies to help you out with your Hashimoto's and hypothyroid symptoms. And over the years, I've helped thousands of patients, and hopefully the information and teaching that I provide to them is something that will serve you as well. So one big piece to having stable energy throughout the day revolves around having a normal cortisol rhythm. Now, I know a lot of us think of cortisol as a stress hormone, and it definitely plays a role in that process as well. But cortisol also has some daily maintenance functions, and it helps us to increase blood sugar levels and fatty acid levels that our body and cells can then use to break down and generate energy from. Now, in normal situations, we should wake up in the morning and have a rapid rise in cortisol over the next 30 to 45 minutes. This is referred to as the cortisol awakening response and is primarily driven by stimulation from the part of our brain called our thalamus, and more specifically, a nucleus referred to as the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This part of the brain has connections to our adrenal system, and once it is stimulated by light, it then communicates to our adrenal organs, eventually leading to the rise in cortisol. By the way, it's this connection between our brain and adrenal system that so many health gurus and health influencers, myself included, I'm not one of those, but I do make this recommendation, that they recommend that you get light in the morning. The actual physical interaction between light and our eyes or our retina is what stimulates that part of the brain. And it's a key part of our cortisol timing and also our overall circadian rhythm. This is why, yes, it is important to have a good and solid sleep routine, but really what sets up our circadian rhythm to be most healthy for us isn't always what we do at the end of the day, but it's also what we do to start our day. However, that's getting a little bit off track from our main point, which is that afternoon fatigue, but it is important for us to understand. The reason why it's important for us to understand this cortisol rhythm is because our cortisol should be high at the start of our day and then gradually decrease until it's eventually time for us to go to sleep. And if we don't have that spike in the morning, then it's hard for us to have a gradual decrease. Or if we have any drop-offs through the day, then that can also give us some issues and lead to the rise of symptoms. And what did we say before? Cortisol plays an important role in helping us to have enough substrate for our cells to make energy. So if our cortisol response is inappropriate or we don't have enough at the proper times, then we can start to see our energy drop. The reason why this tends to be such an issue for people with thyroid problems is when we have changes in thyroid function, it tends to be an additional stressor on our body. When we have that additional stress, our brain and our adrenal system don't communicate as well as they should. And again, this can lead to either a lack of response or an inappropriate or decreased response. Now, most commonly, I see two kinds of patterns for my thyroid patients. The first one is that they have a decent cortisol awakening response, so they can get up in the morning and they do all right. But because their endurance is so poor, although they feel pretty good in the morning, they quickly run out of energy, and that's where we start to see those afternoon issues. I've used this example before, but it'd almost be like if your phone battery didn't charge overnight, and so instead of having it all the way up to 100%, when you woke up in the morning, you were only at 20%. And because you're using it, that 20% quickly goes all the way down to zero, and then you're kind of stuck in the mud. The other pattern that I often see is people who don't have a very good cortisol awakening response. These are the people who wake up in the morning, are feeling really groggy, really cruddy, usually want a few more hours of sleep, but even when they get that extra sleep, they usually don't feel any better. Unlike the first group that quickly uses up the energy that they have and then therefore feels more of that drop off, has more of that crash, the second group didn't have a lot of energy to begin with. And since they don't have that initial awakening response, since they don't have that spike in the morning, they can't really gradually come down. They're low energy to begin with, and they're low energy throughout the day. But similar to the first group, as there is demand placed on their system as they do more things, then they're also burning through the energy that they have available. The drop-off might not be as stark or as clear, but they're generally feeling that as well. So how do we avoid that drop in energy? Well, we want to restore as much normalcy to that cortisol pattern as possible. So we need to make sure that we are having that morning spike, that morning cortisol awakening response. And then we want to provide as much support to the body. That way it can have an easier transition throughout the day, and it doesn't have to rely on some of those internal mechanisms that might not be working efficiently for us at this time. To help with our awakening response, that way we actually have something to kind of work with the rest of the day, there's a few things that I recommend. I do like people to get outside when possible. I know there are certain locations and environment where that isn't the case, but if you can, it's great to do. And I like people to couple that with a little bit of exercise. The exercise doesn't have to be anything crazy. Even just 5 to 10 minutes can be enough. But I do want you to try to get your heart rate up, get your breathing up, and get a little bit sweaty. Challenge the system, have it become more active, and that can really help us to get things moving and get things started. In addition to the daylight and movement, there's also some supplementation that can be helpful to us. This includes drinking some electrolytes before your workout. You can either use the recipe that I have linked in the description box, or you can use one of your favorite products. But I do like people getting at least a gram of sodium, if not more. In addition to the electrolytes, using some products like glycyrrhiza, carnitine, and some of you are going to love this, if you tolerate it, a little bit of caffeine also might not be a bad idea. After the workout, it's important for us to follow that up with a solid breakfast. Now, for a lot of you who have disruptions in this cortisol rhythm, especially those of you who don't have much of an awakening response to begin with, this is going to sound like something that is worse than pulling teeth. It's not going to sound like a lot of fun. And if you're wondering if I'm talking to you, you are the people who are skipping breakfast on most mornings. But I'm not asking you to go from nothing to suddenly eating this gigantic breakfast. Start small, and as you start to get some food in your system, your body will learn that, hey, this is the time when I actually should be eating. And that'll allow you to actually get hungry in the morning, feel like eating, and that'll make things a lot easier for you. For breakfast, I like people to get at least 30 grams of protein, if not more. Sometimes it can be super helpful to front load our day with 40 grams of protein or more with our breakfast, which then can supply us with some of that stability and energy that our body so desperately needs. In addition to the protein, include some healthy fats and carbohydrates, while avoiding some of those more processed carbohydrates, things like cereals, breads, pastries, bagels, and oatmeal. But once we have the start of our day dialed in, then our next step is to make sure that the middle of our day is dialed in, because this is going to be the part that immediately precedes that afternoon crash. A lot of you are super busy, super stressed, forget to eat, forget to take care of yourself in general. And for someone who is struggling with their energy systems, not taking care of yourself is going to make that afternoon crash worse. This is where I like to make sure that people get a lunch in at least an hour before their usual time, where they notice their energy levels starting to dip. In addition to getting some good whole food in you, this is another point in the day where we can have people take some of their carnitine and glycyrrhiza to help support and promote better cortisol activity and therefore better energy levels. Keep in mind that not everyone tolerates these two supplements, but that's probably our rule for all supplements. Not every person is going to tolerate all supplements. That's why different supplements work for different people. We know that. But if you were going to trial L-carnitine, then the way that you would do that, because it can give some people some kind of digestive discomfort, some bloating, some nausea, and we of course want to avoid those things. You'll start with 500 milligrams, and then after taking it for about 2 to 3 days, if everything is good, you can then increase it by 500 milligrams. And eventually you'll want to work your way to taking about 3 or 4 grams per day. As people are increasing their dosage of L-carnitine, my strategy that I usually provide to patients, which I don't know if it makes a big difference or not, but this is kind of the way I do it, is I have them start with their first dose in the morning. Then when they add the second dose of 500 milligrams, it's at midday. Then their third dose will be in the evening. From there, as we work to increase the dosage, we can keep it equally spread throughout those 3 time periods. And ideally, it continues to be gentle on our digestive tract because it's spaced out, but it's also very supportive to energy, whether it's in the morning, midday, afternoon, or evening time. When it comes to glycyrrhiza or licorice root extract, this one can be a little bit trickier because the way different supplement companies process that extract can be it's a little confusing. So anywhere between 50 milligrams and 500 milligrams can be a reasonable dosage, but I always start with people on the lower end, again, test tolerance, and then if we need to, we can increase from there. And people will take an equal dosage, whether that's 50 or 500, in the morning, and then again, midday prior to that energy drop. If all goes well and these pieces start to come together as intended, this isn't going to be something that changes immediately for us. It's going to be something that we're going to be tracking on more of a week by week and likely month by month basis. It takes time to change these energy systems. And just like it takes you a few days to adjust to a new time zone, it can take us a few months when our circadian rhythm might have been thrown off for a period of years. But I'm always looking for those little indications that suggest, yeah, things are on the right track. And what I would hope to see in the first few weeks is that we're waking up in the morning with a little bit of a smile on our face. We're feeling like it's a little bit easier for us. Our energy seems to be a bit higher. That baseline is a bit higher for us throughout the day. And if we are still having a drop off in the afternoon, either it's pushed back until later in the day or the drop off isn't as severe. The next common reason why we're likely to have an afternoon slump is due to the fact that thyroid issues can make us more prone to having problems processing carbohydrates and glucose in general. Changes in thyroid function leads to a change in the function and effectiveness of all of our hormones, and that includes the hormone insulin. Now, we've talked about insulin before, and one of its functions is to help transport glucose from our bloodstream into our cells. That way it can be burned as energy. And just like we talked about with our adrenal system, if we don't get that fuel substrate into our cells, then we're not going to be making energy, and we are going to feel the effects. But just like anything else, there's a balance, and we can only process and tolerate so much glucose at one time. And if we have excess amounts in our bloodstream because we're consuming too much from our meals, and we can't get that excess into our cells fast enough, well, our body has to make a decision, and it doesn't want this glucose to go to waste. So what does it do? It says, well, you know what? I have a really great solution for that. I have a way that I can take that glucose and put it into a form that I can store and use for later. And in the human body, that form of storage is fat. Now the thing is, you might have noticed that glucose and fat are 2 different things. But we have some really cool processes in our body that allows us to convert one into the other. However, that conversion process uses a lot of energy. And if we're someone who is already pretty low on our energy, our battery is on that low end, then the increase in demand is going to take what we have left and use it all up. And that's when we're going to feel that slump. Now, though, for people with thyroid problems, it's usually the carbs that gets us. It can also simply be too many calories in general. So whenever you eat a really large meal, or it's a meal that's high in carbs and sugar, and you start to feel tired 30 to 60 minutes afterwards, that's when we need to recognize that our body is putting on added body fat, and it's doing that via a conversion pathway, which requires a lot of energy. So I know I said before that people with adrenal problems need to make sure that they're eating lunch, and in these scenarios, I think you should probably be eating as well. However, you want to be mindful of your portion size and mindful of the amount of carbohydrates that you're eating. Try playing around with the size of your meal, try swapping those carbohydrates for maybe some healthy fats or protein, and see if you can get that post-meal fatigue and that afternoon slump to reduce in severity. Finally, the last reason that we're going to cover today, and keep in mind that this is not all of the reasons, these are just some of them, and not only are they common, which is why I brought them up, but they're also things that we can make some relatively easy changes to help improve them. And that's always a nice thing to be able to do. But our last afternoon energy suck also has to do with our digestion, but in this case, it's not about how much we're eating. Instead, it's about eating some of those foods that our body doesn't tolerate and it doesn't interact very well with. Identifying food sensitivities and food allergies is always a big part of what we do in my clinic. And if we're eating something on a regular basis that is bothering our system, then it's just like if we are scratching at an open wound. That wound is never going to heal because it's always being irritated. And the same thing goes for our gut, for our adrenal system, and for our thyroid health at large. When we eat a food that our body doesn't necessarily like, it's going to put a lot of effort and energy into trying to break that food down, while at the same time, there's going to be this recruited immune response that has its own demands. Ask yourself how you feel when you catch a cold or catch the flu. When your immune system is engaged, when it's being recruited to fight off that infection, it demands a huge amount of energy, and we feel super tired and lethargic. Now imagine that that same or similar immune recruitment is going on every time that you eat. Not only is it going to make you not feel good and likely lead to a number of other inflammatory related symptoms, but it's also going to be a huge drain on your energy. So like we said before, you guys are already busy enough. And if you're working through the day or taking care of your kids or what have you, and then you put some sort of food that causes a negative reaction on top of all that stuff, well, it typically applies a load to the system that you simply aren't going to bounce back from. So maybe your breakfast and the start of your day look pretty dang good, but as you get busier and busier, your lunch is often, a piece of pizza, a sandwich, a noodle dish, maybe even just a few cookies. And these foods potentially include a few or more than a few ingredients that just don't agree with you. They are very likely going to irritate your gut, and it is going to cause that decrease in energy. Now, this reaction is going to be very dependent on the foods that you're eating. So you'll likely notice that, depending on what you choose, some days are going to be a bit better for you in the afternoon, especially when compared to others. What you'll want to do is keep a food journal and also note when symptoms are the worst. Over a few weeks, you'll be able to establish some patterns and hopefully identify those foods that are more of a problem for you and remove them from your diet. The nice thing about these food reactions when compared to some of those adrenal changes that we discussed is once we make the changes in our diet, the response should be a little bit more readily noticeable. Instead of the improvement taking weeks to months, it's more likely to take days to weeks. And as long as you're being consistent with your nutrition, then you can expect that improvement to continue. In the end, as I always like to point out, we need to make sure that our strategies match the physiology. And once we can do that, that's when we can really be rewarded for our efforts and we can feel good about the changes that we're seeing. But as always, I would love to know your thoughts on the topic. Do you struggle with your energy levels in general? And have you noticed having more of a slump in the afternoon? If you have been able to make some improvements and see changes, what sort of strategies are you using and what has served you the best? I can't wait to see what you guys have come up with, and I'm looking forward to chatting about it more in the comments. But hopefully you've learned a lot today. However, if you are someone who's been struggling with a lot of these energy issues and a number of other thyroid symptoms, you keep telling your doctor this, but they keep responding that your labs look normal, keep taking your medication, there's nothing else that can be done, and you're really frustrated with that response, then I encourage you to send me an email at contact@seattlethyroidhelp.com and potentially figure out if it would be a good fit to work with me one-on-one, because I know if we can do a deeper dive into your health history, look at some of the labs that maybe you haven't had done, then we can create a plan that addresses your specific needs and help you to feel better. Now, I always tell my patients that I'm not perfect and, I do make mistakes, but I know that if I can work together with my patients as a team and we can implement all the different strategies that we know are real and functional for these types of conditions, then I do believe that these things can get better. I do believe that people can live the lives that they want to be able to live and that there is hope. So if that's something that interests you, please reach out. These consultations are, never a high pressure sales situation. It's just some time for us to sit down, talk about where you're at, and figure out the best next step together. Otherwise, if you'd rather keep on learning on your own, there's some resources for that as well. You can check out any of the other videos on the channel. There's a lot of them these days, and we've covered a lot of topics. You can also grab either one of my free downloads listed in the description box, or you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook, where I post daily information, tips, and strategies that I use with my patients all the time. But that is it for this video. I hope that you liked it, and I hope that you learned some new information that'll help you to make some positive changes. If you did like the video, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't done so, subscribe to the channel. That way we can continue to learn, grow, and heal together. But my name is Dr. Brad Bodle. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all the support. I hope that you're well, and I will see you in the next one.